The sound of a silver fork hitting fine china shouldn't sound like a gunshot, but in the suffocating silence of our dining room, it did. I looked across the long mahogany table at Mark, my husband of 3 years, the man I had crossed an ocean for, the man I had learned to cook pot roast for, the man for whom I had erased my accent until my tongue felt heavy and foreign in my own mouth. He wasn't eating. He was cutting his steak with surgical precision, dissecting the meat just as he had dissected my life since the day I arrived in Connecticut. "The wine isn't breathing enough, Alina," Mark said, not looking up. His voice was calm, smooth, the kind of voice that closed million-dollar deals and charmed investors. It was the voice I fell in love with before I realized it was just a tool of his trade. "I opened it an hour ago, Mark," I replied softly. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping my napkin so tightly my knuckles were turning white. I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the air pressure of the room. The storm wasn't outside. It was sitting right there, wearing an Armani suit. Mark finally put his knife down. He dabbed the corners of his mouth with the linen napkin, took a sip of the wine he had just criticized, and then sighed. It was a sigh of inconvenience, the kind a man makes when his flight is delayed or his coffee is lukewarm. "We need to talk about the merger," he said. I frowned slightly. "The merger, with the structural steel company, I thought you closed that last week." Mark chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "No, Alina, not the company, us." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the polished wood. It stopped exactly in front of my untouched plate. "What is this?" I whispered, though I think my heart already knew. "A restructuring," Mark said, leaning back in his chair, interlacing his fingers. "My advisors and I have been looking at the projections for the next quarter, my political ambitions. They're becoming a reality, Alina. The Senate run is happening." "I know," I said. "I've been organizing the fundraising gala. You've been trying," he interrupted, his eyes cold and blue like glacial ice. "And that's the problem, you try too hard, but let's be honest, look at you." He gestured vaguely at me. At my dark hair, my almond eyes, the features that made me exotic and exciting to him 3 years ago when he met me in my home country. "You don't fit the demographic, Alina," he said, as if discussing a billboard design. "Voters in this state, they want traditional, they want American, they want someone like Sarah Jenkins. Her father isn't just a steel magnate, he's the head of the party committee." My stomach dropped. Sarah, the woman who had been consulting with him for months, the woman who looked at me like I was the housekeeping staff whenever she visited his office. "You're leaving me for business?" I asked. My voice didn't shake, I wouldn't let it. "I'm leaving you for viability," Mark corrected, sounding bored. "Open the envelope." My fingers trembled slightly as I undid the seal. Inside, there were 3 documents. The first was a petition for divorce, already signed by him. The second was a non-disclosure agreement, thick with legal jargon. The third was a single piece of paper, printed on cheap stock. A plain ticket, one-way, economy class, departing tonight at 9:00 p.m. I looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 6:30 p.m. "You're kicking me out," I asked, looking up at him. "Tonight." "The house needs to be staged for a photo shoot tomorrow morning," Mark said, checking his Rolex. "Architectural Digest is coming. Sarah will be here at 8:00 a.m. to oversee the decor. We can't have clutter." Clutter. That's what I was. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of managing his home, nursing him through the flu, tolerating his mother's passive-aggressive comments about my village upbringing. And now, I was clutter to be swept away before the cameras arrived. "I have nowhere to go, Mark," I said. "My family, you know I haven't spoken to them since I married you. They didn't approve. I gave up everything." And I provided for you, Mark countered sharply. You've lived in luxury. You've worn designer clothes. Consider the last 3 years' fair payment for your services. He stood up, buttons his jacket. The meeting was over. The driver is waiting outside, he said, not meeting my eyes anymore. He'll take you to JFK. You can pack 2 suitcases, just your personal effects. No jewelry I bought you. No handbags, those are assets of the marriage. And if I refuse? Mark paused at the doorway. He turned back, and for the first time his mask slipped. I saw the cruelty underneath. Then I cancel the ticket, he smiled. And I call the police. You're on a spousal visa, Alina. Without me, you're just a tourist who's overstayed her welcome. Do you really want to be deported in handcuffs? Think of the optics. He walked out of the dining room. I sat there, frozen. The smell of the expensive roast beef was suddenly nauseating. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a countdown. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I didn't scream. I didn't pick up the wine glass and throw it against the wall, even though every cell in my body wanted to shatter something. Instead, I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me. I walked to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn, the swimming pool, the life I was being exiled from. Mark thought he was breaking me. He thought I was just a poor girl from a developing country who had won the lottery and was now losing the ticket. He thought my silence was weakness. He had forgotten who I was before I met him. He had forgotten that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, silence is just the sound of a predator waiting in the tall grass. I turned away from the window and walked toward the stairs to pack my 2 suitcases. I wouldn't take the jewelry. I wouldn't take the bags. I had something much more valuable. Buried deep in the bottom of my old wooden trunk, wrapped in a silk scarf that smelled like incense and memory, was the one thing I hadn't looked at in 10 years. The one thing my mother had pressed into my hand the day I left home, tears in her eyes, warning me about men like Mark. Mark wanted me to leave with nothing. Fine. I would leave with exactly what I came with. And God help him when he finds out what that actually is. The walk-in closet was larger than the entire apartment I had grown up in. It was a cavern of cedar and recessed lighting, a shrine to the woman Mark had molded me into. Rows of designer dresses hung like distinct personalities, the sleek black numbers for his cocktail parties, the demure pastels for brunch with his mother, the stiff, structured suits for his campaign events. They were costumes, every single one of them. I pulled my 2 battered suitcases from the back shelf. They were the same ones I had arrived with 3 years ago. Dusty, scuffed, the zippers slightly rusted. They looked like intruders in this pristine space, much like I did. 2 suitcases, he had said. Personal effects only. I ran my hand over a silk Hermes scarf. He had bought it for me after I found a text message from Sarah on his phone 6 months ago. It was a bribe, a silken gag to keep me quiet. I left it on the shelf. I moved past the diamond tennis bracelet, the Cartier watch, the pearls. I stripped myself of the armor of the American trophy wife. Into the suitcase went my old wool sweaters, the ones that smelled like the rainy season back home. In went the comfortable cotton trousers Mark hated because they lacked silhouette. In went the books written in my mother tongue, the ones I read in secret when Mark was away on business, because he said seeing those characters gave him a headache. As I folded a simple linen shirt, a memory washed over me, sharp and stinging. It was my first Thanksgiving with his family. I had spent 3 days preparing a traditional turkey, following the recipe exactly. But I had also made a small side dish from my country, a savory dumpling soup, hoping to share a piece of myself. Mark's mother had peered into the pot, wrinkled her nose, and asked, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Is that sanitary? I've heard the hygiene standards in your villages are flexible." The table had laughed. Mark had laughed. He had squeezed my knee under the table and whispered, "Don't take it personally, Alina. Just maybe clear that away before the guests start eating." I had taken the soup back to the kitchen and poured it down the sink. I learned then that my history was something to be washed away, sterilized, and hidden. I shook the memory off. I didn't need to hide anymore. I was being discarded, and in a strange, painful way, it was liberating. I reached the bottom of the second suitcase. It was nearly full, but there was one thing missing. I knelt on the plush carpet and reached under the heavy oak vanity, prying loose a loose floorboard I had discovered while cleaning one day. There it was, the small sandalwood box. It was the only thing I had refused to unpack. The wood was dark, polished by decades of handling, smelling faintly of incense and dried jasmine. My mother had given it to me at the airport gate, her hands trembling as she pressed it into mine. "You are going to a land of wolves, my daughter," she had said, her eyes wet. "You think because he wears a suit and smiles, he is not a wolf. They are the hungriest kind." I opened the box. Inside lay a few dried flower petals, a photo of my parents and the card. It didn't look like money. It didn't look like the platinum American Express card mark slammed onto restaurant tables to assert dominance. It looked like a relic. It was made of a heavy, matte metal that felt cold to the touch. The edges were worn, the black coating chipped in places to reveal a dull bronze underneath. There was no magnetic strip, no smart chip, no 16-digit number embossed across the front. There was only a complex, etched geometric pattern, a crest that belonged to a history older than the country I was standing in, and a single line of script in a language that hadn't been spoken commonly for centuries. On the back, in faint gold leaf that was barely legible, was a signature. "Use it only when the sky falls," my mother had whispered. "Only when you have no roof, no name, and no hope." I had laughed then. I was in love. I was marrying a wealthy American businessman. The sky wasn't going to fall. I picked up the card. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained its own gravity. I ran my thumb over the chipped edge. "The sky has fallen, Mama," I whispered into the empty closet. I slipped the card into the pocket of my jeans. I zipped the suitcases shut. The sound was final, a zipper closing on 3 years of my life. I dragged the luggage down the grand, spiraling staircase. The wheels bumped loudly on each step, thud, 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 echoing through the silent house. The housekeeper, Maria, was dusting the foyer. She looked up, her eyes widening as she saw me. She knew. The staff always knew before the wife did. "Mrs. Alina," she asked softly, clutching her feather duster. Do you need help?" "No, Maria," I said, forcing a small smile. "I'm just clearing the clutter." I opened the heavy front door. The cool autumn air hit me, biting and crisp. The black town car Mark had ordered was waiting in the circular driveway. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, popped the trunk without getting out. I lifted the heavy bags myself, my muscles straining. I wouldn't ask for help. Not now, not ever again. As I climbed into the back seat, I pulled out my phone to check the time. I had a few hours before the flight. I needed to get to the city center. I needed cash. I had $0 in my wallet. Mark managed all the finances. "Why do you need cash?" he would always ask. "Just use the supplementary card. I get the points." I tapped the banking app on my phone. Login failed. User access revoked. I tried the Uber app to see if I could change the destination from the airport to the bank downtown. Payment method declined. Please update your billing information. He had been thorough. He had cut the digital umbilical cord before I even left the driveway. "Driver," I said, leaning forward. "Change of plans. I need you to take me to the First National Bank on 5th and Grand before the airport." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Mark said JFK, direct." "I am the passenger," I said, my voice hardening. "And I have errands to run. unless you want me to tell your boss you refused his wife's request." It was a bluff. I wasn't his wife anymore, not really. But the driver didn't know the paperwork was signed. He grunted and turned the wheel. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back at the mansion. I touched the cold metal card in my pocket. I was walking into the war without a sword, armed only with a piece of old metal my mother claimed was magic but looked like scrap. I hoped she was right, because if she wasn't, I wasn't just homeless, I was dead. The First National Bank branch on 5th and Grand was less a bank and more a cathedral to capitalism. It was a towering structure of glass and steel, the lobby dominated by pillars of white marble and an overarching silence that made whispers sound like shouts. It was where Mark did his business. It was where the old money of the city kept their secrets. The driver dropped me at the curb, refusing to wait. "I have another pickup," he lied, speeding off before I could even drag the second suitcase onto the sidewalk. I stood there, wind-blown and weary, 2 battered suitcases flanking me like loyal but ugly dogs. People in tailored suits brushed past me, giving me a wide berth. I saw the looks. The quick, assessing glances that categorized me instantly: tourist, lost, servant, nobody. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and pushed through the revolving doors. The air inside was conditioned to a perfect, sterile chill. I dragged my suitcases across the polished marble floor. The sound of the wheels was excruciatingly loud, a low rumble that drew the attention of the security guard and the receptionists. I needed to withdraw whatever was left in a small personal savings account I had set up when I first arrived. An account Mark deemed cute because it never had more than a few $100s in it. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a night at a motel and a meal. As I moved toward the teller line, a familiar laugh cut through the hush of the lobby. My blood froze. I looked toward the glass-walled offices on the mezzanine level, the VIP section reserved for high-net-worth clients. The door to the senior vice president's office was open. Mark was there. He was standing with his back to me, shaking hands with a gray-haired man in a pinstripe suit. Next to him stood his lawyer, holding a thick leather folder. They were laughing, the relaxed, hearty laugh of men who have just secured a victory. Of course, he was freezing the assets. He was ensuring that even if I got a lawyer, there would be nothing to find. He was erasing our marriage financially at the same moment he had erased it physically. I lowered my head, hoping to pass unnoticed. I just needed $50, just enough to get away. But fate, it seemed, was not done with me yet. "Elena." The voice boomed across the lobby. It wasn't Mark. It was his lawyer, a man named Henderson who had always looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. Mark turned around. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer irritation. He walked to the railing of the mezzanine and looked down at me, standing there with my scuffed luggage in the middle of his sanctuary. "What are you doing here?" Mark called out. He didn't bother to lower his voice. The entire bank lobby went quiet. Tellers paused their counting. Customers stopped filling out slips. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I refused to cower. "I am here to make a withdrawal, Mark, from my personal account." Mark laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He descended the stairs, flanked by his lawyer, moving like a king descending to address a peasant. "Your personal account," Mark said as he reached the lobby floor, stopping just close enough to intimidate me but far enough to avoid touching me. "Elena, darling, you don't have a personal account. You have a checking account that I fund. And as of 2 hours ago, that funding has ceased." "I deposited my tutoring money there," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. "I have $300. "Administrative fees," Henderson the lawyer chimed in, smirking. "Closing costs, wire transfer penalties. The account is effectively empty, Mrs. Well, Elena." Mark shook his head, looking around the lobby as if apologizing to the onlookers for the disturbance. "This is embarrassing, Alina. I bought you a ticket. I hired a car. And here you are, dragging your luggage into my bank, begging for scraps like a panhandler." "I am not begging," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I want what is mine." "Nothing here is yours," Mark snapped, his patience snapping. "Look around you. You think you belong here, with your discount luggage and your sad little clothes. You were a guest in this world. The visit is over." He turned to the security guard who had drifted closer. "Officer, this woman is bothering the clientele. She has no business here. Please escort her out." The guard, a burly man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I have a right to be here," I said, stepping back. "I am a customer." "She's a nuisance," Mark corrected. He looked at me with eyes devoid of any love, any history. "Go to the airport, Alina. Don't make me call immigration. Don't make this uglier than it is." I looked at the tellers. They were staring at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. The young woman at the nearest window, whose name tag read Tiffany, was popping gum and shaking her head, clearly enjoying the drama. I looked at Mark. He checked his watch, dismissing me entirely. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but a quiet, structural fracture that cleared away the fear and left only cold, hard resolve. "I wish to make a withdrawal," I repeated, my voice clear and bell-like in the silence. "We just told you you have no money," Mark shouted, throwing his hands up. "Not from your account," I said. I reached into my pocket. My fingers curled around the cold, uneven metal of the card. I walked past Mark. I walked past the security guard. I walked straight up to Tiffany's window. "Ma'am, if you don't have an account," Tiffany started, looking past me at Mark for approval to reject me. "I would like to make a withdrawal," I said, placing the card on the marble counter. It made a sound when it hit the stone, not the plastic clack of a credit card, but a heavy, resonant thud, like a gavel hitting a block. Mark snorted from behind me. "What is that? A Blockbuster membership? God, Alina, this is pathetic even for you. Is that from your mother's village? Did she trade a goat for it?" The insult to my mother pierced me, but I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the teller. Tiffany looked at the card. She frowned. She picked it up with two manicured fingers as if it were dirty. She turned it over, looking for a magnetic strip. "There's no numbers on this," she said, popping her gum. "We don't take, whatever this is, we don't accept foreign ID cards or library cards." "It is not a library card," I said softly. "Swipe it." "Swipe what?" Tiffany laughed. "There's no strip." "Key it in," I said. "There is a code on the back, under the signature." "Ma'am, I'm not wasting my time typing in." "Just do it," I said. It was the first time I had raised my voice. It carried a tone of command that startled even me. Tiffany rolled her eyes. She sighed loudly, looked at Mark, who was now shaking his head in mock despair, and typed the alphanumeric code into her terminal. "I'm telling you, it's not going to." She hit enter. The machine didn't beep. It didn't whir. Instead, the screen on her terminal went black. "Great," Tiffany muttered. "You crashed my computer." Then the screen flashed, not the usual blue of the banking interface. It turned a deep, alarming crimson red. A single word pulsed in the center of the screen in white, bold letters. "Sovereign." Then, a secondary message appeared below it. "Level 0 clearance detected." "Protocol, silent alarm." "Notify, directorate." The loud, rhythmic beeping of a high-level security alert began to chirp from the computer. Not a standard error noise, but a piercing, urgent sound that I had never heard before. "What did you do?" Tiffany gasped, backing away from the computer as if it were a bomb. "It says, It says do not decline. Behind me, the laughter stopped. Suddenly, the heavy steel doors at the back of the bank, the ones that led to the vault and the executive suites, slammed open. The branch manager, Mr. Sterling, a man I had only seen once in a magazine, came running out. He wasn't walking, he was sprinting. He was pale, his tie askew, holding a red phone handset that was still connected to a long cord. "Who?" he shouted, looking frantically at the tellers. "Who keyed the code? Who is here?" Mark stepped forward, assuming the manager was coming for him. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize. This is my ex-wife. She's trying to pass some fraudulent card. I was just having security remove her." Mr. Sterling didn't even look at Mark. He shoved Mark aside with a force that sent my husband stumbling into a velvet rope. The manager ran to the counter. He looked at the screen. He looked at the battered metal card sitting on the marble. His hands shook as he reached out to touch it, but he pulled back, as if afraid to dirty it. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a terror and reverence I couldn't comprehend. "The seal," he whispered. He looked at my clothes, my battered suitcases, and then back to my face. Slowly, agonizingly, the branch manager of the First National Bank dropped to his knees. Right there in the lobby, on the cold marble floor. "Forgive us," Mr. Sterling stammered, his head bowed low. "We did not know. We were not prepared for a visit." The silence in the bank was now absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Mark stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. "Sterling, what the hell are you doing? Get up, it's just Alina." Mr. Sterling lifted his head, his face drained of color. He looked at Mark with a gaze of pure venom. "Silence," the manager hissed. "You are speaking in the presence of the trust." He turned back to me, his voice trembling. "Madame," he said, "the vault is open. The assets of this branch are at your disposal. How may we serve the family?" I looked at the card. I looked at Mark. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel small. I felt like the sky was falling, just as Mother promised. And I was the only one holding an umbrella. The First National Bank on Fifth Avenue was designed to make you feel small. That was its architectural purpose. The ceilings were vaulted like a Gothic cathedral, but instead of frescoes of saints, they held recessed lighting that cast a cold, clinical glare on the marble floors below. The air was scented with chilled ozone and expensive cologne, recycled through a filtration system that hummed with a low, imperceptible vibration, the sound of money moving in the dark. I pushed through the heavy brass revolving doors, the rubber seals sighing as they swept me into the lobby. The transition from the biting autumn wind outside to the hermetically sealed silence inside was jarring. My 2 suitcases, their wheels worn and uneven, rumbled across the pristine white stone floor. Thud-clack, thud-clack. In a place built for the silent glide of Italian leather loafers, my luggage sounded like a rock slide. Heads turned, not quickly, but with the languid, judgmental curiosity of predators disturbed from a nap. A security guard near the fountain straightened up, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt, assessing the threat level of a woman in jeans and a linen coat dragging her life behind her. I kept my head high, fixing my eyes on the teller line. I was not a threat. I was a nuisance. And in this world, a nuisance was often treated worse than a criminal. I needed $50. Maybe $100 if the account hadn't been completely drained by fees, just enough for a motel room in Queens and a meal that wasn't from a vending machine. I had checked my banking app in the taxi, only to see the grayed-out login screen. Mark had moved fast, faster than the law required, faster than decency allowed. He had severed the digital limbs of our marriage before the ink on the divorce papers was even wet. As I navigated around a velvet rope, a voice cut through the hushed murmur of the lobby. It was a laugh, baritone, confident, and painfully familiar. I froze. My grip on the suitcase handle tightened until my nails bit into my palm. I looked up toward the mezzanine level, a floating glass platform that housed the private wealth management suites. The door to the vice president's office was open. Standing there, framed by the glass like a mannequin in a store window, was Mark. He looked impeccable. He was wearing the navy pinstripe suit I had picked up from the dry cleaners for him just yesterday. He was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, gesturing with his free hand as he spoke to two other men, his shark of a lawyer, Henderson, and a man I recognized as a local real estate tycoon. They were celebrating. My stomach twisted. He wasn't just divorcing me, he was erasing me. The timing, the frozen accounts, the immediate eviction, it was a coordinated strike. And now he was up there toasting to his victory, to the successful removal of the clutter from his life. I lowered my head, hoping to pass beneath his line of sight. If I could just get to the teller, get my cash, and leave, I could preserve the last shred of my dignity. Well, if it isn't the runaway bride. The voice boomed from above, amplified by the acoustics of the marble hall. It wasn't Mark. It was Henderson, the lawyer. He had spotted me. The silence in the bank deepened. The low hum of conversation stopped. The tellers paused in the middle of counting bills. Every eye in the room, clients, staff, security, shifted from their business to the spectacle unfolding in the center of the room. Mark turned. He stepped to the glass railing, looking down at me. His expression wasn't one of anger or even surprise. It was a look of profound, exhausted disappointment. The kind of look a parent gives a child who has wet the bed. "Alina," Mark called down. He didn't shout, but his projection was perfect. "What are you doing here?" I stopped moving. There was no point in hiding. I slowly lifted my head to meet his gaze. "I am banking, Mark," I said. My voice felt small in the cavernous room, but I kept it steady. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. He said something to the men beside him, and they laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Then Mark began to descend the floating staircase. He moved with the easy grace of a man who owned the building, the ground, and the very air I was breathing. He reached the lobby floor and walked toward me, stopping 5 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid contamination. "Banking," Mark repeated, savoring the absurdity of the word. "Alina, darling, you don't bank, you spend. I bank. And considering I just revoked your access to my capital, I'm struggling to understand what business you could possibly have here." "I have my personal savings," I said. "The account I opened when I arrived." "The allowance account," Henderson chimed in, stepping up beside Mark. He smirked, adjusting his silk tie. "We closed that an hour ago, Mrs. Vance. Standard procedure during the dissolution of assets. The balance, which was negligible, by the way, was applied to the administrative fees for the transfer." I felt the blood drain from my face. That was my money I earned tutoring. "It was marital property," Mark said, bored. "And now it's a filing fee. Look, Alina, this is pathetic, you dragging these things," he gestured vaguely at my battered suitcases with his glass, "into a place of business. You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "I'm trying to survive. You put me on the street with nothing." "I gave you a ticket home," Mark snapped, his veneer of calm cracking just a fraction. "I gave you an out, but instead of going to the airport, you come here to do what? To beg, to embarrass me in front of my partners." He looked around the lobby, spreading his arms as if inviting the audience to judge me. "Look at her," he said to the room at large. "I took her out of a concrete apartment in the middle of nowhere. I gave her a life most women would kill for, and this is the thanks I get, stalking me at my bank." The whispers started. I could hear them. "That's his wife. She looks like the help. Gold digger, obviously." The humiliation wasn't hot and fiery. It was cold. It felt like ice water being poured down my spine. I stood there, stripped of my home, my money, and my name, while the man who had promised to love me until death tore me apart for an audience of strangers. "Security," Mark said, snapping his fingers. The guard stepped forward, his hand now resting firmly on his taser. "Sir." "Escort this woman out," Mark said, turning his back on me. "She's trespassing, and if she comes back, call the police." "Ma'am," the guard said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Let's go, don't make me drag you." I looked at Mark's back. I looked at the guard. I looked at the row of tellers who were watching with a mixture of pity and disdain. A fire ignited in my chest. It wasn't the wild fire of rage. It was the blue, focused flame of absolute clarity. "I am a customer," I said. Mark stopped. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. "I have a right to be here," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I have a transaction to make." Mark turned back slowly. His eyes were cold, dead things. "You have nothing, Alina. You are nothing. You are a rounding error in my ledger. Now get out before I have you arrested for vagrancy." "I am not leaving," I said. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked past Mark. I walked past Henderson, who looked stunned that I hadn't crumbled into tears. I walked past the security guard, who hesitated, confused by my sudden resolve. I walked straight to the teller window marked Premium Services. The teller, a young woman with heavily lined eyes and a nameplate that read Tiffany, looked at me as if I were a cockroach that had crawled across her counter. She crossed her arms, chewing a piece of gum with slow, deliberate insolence. "Windows closed," she said flatly, even though her light was on. "I need to make a withdrawal," I said. "Didn't you hear Mr. Vance?" Tiffany said, leaning forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "You're broke, honey. We don't do charity here. Try the shelter down on 4th Street. Behind me, Mark laughed again. "Let her try, Tiffany. Let her see what zero looks like." I stood alone at the counter. The world was against me. The system was designed to crush me. But they didn't know about the box. They didn't know about the legacy. I reached into the pocket of my jeans. My fingers brushed the cold metal. It was time. The card felt heavier than it should have. Physically, it was just a rectangle of metal, but metaphysically, it felt like I was holding a collapsed star. It held the weight of my mother's secrets, the weight of a history I had run away from, and the weight of a power I didn't fully understand. I pulled it out. It caught the harsh overhead lights, but it didn't shine. It absorbed the light. The matte black surface was scarred and pitted from decades of existence. The gold etching, the complex, fractal geometric crest of my maternal bloodline, was faded, looking more like a scratch than a symbol of royalty. I placed it on the marble counter. Thunk. The sound was distinct. It wasn't the plastic clatter of a Visa or MasterCard. It was the dull, heavy sound of a weapon being placed on a table. Tiffany stared at it. She wrinkled her nose, leaning back as if the object emitted a foul odor. "What is that?" she asked, popping her gum. "A withdrawal authorization," I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face remained a mask of calm. "I need cash." Tiffany let out a short, derisive snort. She reached out with 2 long, manicured talons and picked up the card by its very corner. She held it up to the light, flipping it over. "This is a joke, right?" she said, loud enough for Mark to hear. "There's no magnetic strip, there's no chip, there's no Visa logo. Hell, the numbers aren't even raised." "It's scrap metal," Mark called out from behind me. He had moved closer, enjoying the show. "It's probably something she dug out of a dumpster, a souvenir from the old country. God, Alina, this is a new low, trying to pawn scrap metal at a bank." "It is not scrap," I said, locking eyes with Tiffany. "It is a legacy instrument. Look at the back. There is a code." Tiffany squinted at the back of the card. "You mean this chicken scratch? It's barely legible. And what is this signature? It looks like it was written with a quill pen. Enter the code, I commanded. I can't just enter a code, Tiffany sighed, dropping the card back onto the counter with a clatter. The system requires a card read. If it doesn't swipe and it doesn't chip, it doesn't exist. Now please move along. I have actual clients waiting. Enter the code. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I pushed the card forward with my index finger. There is a manual entry function on your terminal, I said, remembering something my mother had told me once, a lifetime ago. The system will always change, but the foundation remains. They will always have a backdoor for us. I know how to do my job, Tiffany snapped. And I know that typing in random numbers from a piece of junk is a waste of time. Humor her, Mark said. He was standing right behind me now, his presence looming. Go ahead, Tiffany, type it in. Let the machine reject her. I want her to see the declined message. I want her to see it in red letters. Maybe then this delusion will break. Tiffany rolled her eyes. Fine, whatever, but if this crashes my terminal, I'm blaming you. She pulled her keyboard closer, aggressively typing. She squinted at the card, pecking at the keys with exaggerated annoyance. Alpha 7 Omega 44-0. I recited the code in my head as she typed it. It was the only thing I had memorized from the card, the sequence burnt into my brain since childhood. Okay, Tiffany said, hovering her finger over the enter key. Here goes nothing. Prepare for rejection. She pressed the key. For a second, nothing happened. The hum of the bank seemed to continue uninterrupted. Then the sound began. It wasn't a beep. It wasn't a buzzer. It was a low, resonant thrum that seemed to come from the floor itself. It vibrated through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, settling in my chest. On Tiffany's screen, the familiar blue interface of the banking software vanished. It didn't just switch screens, it collapsed. The pixels scrambled, glitching violently. What the hell? Tiffany muttered, tapping the escape key. It's frozen, you broke it. Then the screen went black. A second later, every screen in the teller row went black. The monitors at the customer service desks went black. The large digital display board showing stock market trends on the far wall flickered and died. A collective gasp went through the lobby. Great, Mark groaned. She put a virus in the system. I told you she's... Beep. A single, piercing tone cut him off. It came from Tiffany's computer. The black screen suddenly flooded with color. Not red, not green. Purple, a deep, regal imperial purple. In the center of the screen, a golden crest appeared, the exact same geometric fractal etched onto the old metal card. It spun slowly, rendering in high-definition 3D graphics that looked far too advanced for a bank terminal. Underneath the crest, a single word typed itself out, letter by letter, in a font that looked like calligraphy. SOVEREIGN. Tiffany scrambled back from her chair, her gum falling out of her mouth. I didn't do it. I just typed the numbers. A message box popped up below the word. Identity confirmed. House of Lan. Clearance, absolute. Asset liquidity, unlimited. Protocol, Royal Ascension. What is this? Henderson whispered, leaning over the counter, his legal arrogance replaced by confusion. House of Lan, I've never heard of. He didn't finish his sentence. The pneumatic tube system behind the tellers, the clear pipes used to transport documents and cash, suddenly hissed. All of them. Every canister slammed into the receiving bay at once. The automatic cash dispensers at every window began to whir. Not the click-click of a $20 withdrawal. It was the mechanical roar of machinery being pushed to its limit. And then, the silence of the bank was shattered by the sound of locks disengaging. Clank, clank, clank. The heavy steel doors leading to the vault area, which were usually on a time lock, groaned. The massive bolts retracted automatically. Mark stepped back, his face draining of color. He looked at the screen, then at me. "Alina, what is that card? Did you hack the bank?" I didn't answer him. I didn't look at him. I was watching the door to the manager's office. Mr. Sterling, the branch manager, was a man who prided himself on control. I had seen him once before, yelling at a janitor for a smudge on the glass. He was a man who feared chaos. But as he burst out of his office, he wasn't fearing chaos. He was fearing God. He ran. He didn't walk fast. He ran, knocking over a potted plant in his haste. He was clutching a red telephone handset, the cord ripped from the wall, as if he had been in the middle of a call that had terrified him to his very soul. "Stop," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Nobody move, nobody touch anything." He skidded to a halt at the teller line, his chest heaving. He looked at the purple screen. He looked at the metal card sitting innocently on the marble. He looked at the open vault doors. Then slowly, terrifiedly, he turned his eyes to me. He didn't see the jeans. He didn't see the linen coat. He didn't see the battered suitcases. He saw something that made his knees buckle. "Mr. Sterling," Mark barked, trying to regain control of the narrative. "My ex-wife has clearly compromised your security system. I demand you call the FBI. She's committing fraud right in front of—" "Shut your mouth," Mr. Sterling screamed, spinning on Mark with a ferocity that stunned everyone. "One more word, Mr. Vance, and I will have security break your jaw." Mark recoiled as if slapped. "Excuse me." Mr. Sterling ignored him. He turned back to me. His hands were shaking so hard he had to clasp them together to stop the tremors. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and then, in front of 50 witnesses, the manager of the First National Bank lowered himself. He went down on one knee, then the other. He bowed his head until his forehead was almost touching the dirty floor near my scuffed sneakers. "Mademoiselle," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and dread. "We did not know the system. It had been dormant for 40 years. We thought the line was extinct." The lobby was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the purple screens. "Rise, Mr. Sterling," I said softly. He didn't rise. He stayed on his knees, refusing to look me in the eye. "We are unworthy," he stammered. "The vault is open. The reserves are yours. The board of directors has been notified. They are helicoptering in from Manhattan as we speak." I looked at Mark. He was staring at the kneeling manager, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. He looked at the card again, the scrap metal he had mocked. "Alina," Mark whispered, his voice small, stripped of all its power. Who are you?" I reached out and picked up the card. It was cold. It was heavy. It was mine. "I told you, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a diamond cutter. "I am a customer." I turned to the manager, who was still trembling on the floor. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I would like to make a withdrawal, and then I would like to discuss the foreclosure of some assets, specifically the accounts of Mr. Mark Vance." Mr. Sterling looked up, his eyes filled with the zeal of a servant given a holy mission. "It would be my honor, my lady," he hissed. "Consider it done." Mark's phone began to buzz in his pocket, then Henderson's phone, then the real estate tycoon's phone. A chorus of notifications. Mark pulled his phone out. His hands were shaking. He looked at the screen. "Alert, ASSETS frozen. Liquidation imminent." He looked at me, terror finally replacing the arrogance. I didn't smile. I just watched. The sky was falling and the sound was beautiful. The sound of a life collapsing is surprisingly digital. It doesn't sound like crumbling stone or tearing fabric. It sounds like a relentless, discordant symphony of chimes, buzzes, and default ringtones. Mark stood in the center of the lobby, the marble floor beneath him suddenly feeling less like a foundation and more like a trapdoor. His phone was vibrating so violently in his hand that it looked like a living thing trying to escape his grip. Beside him, Henderson's phone was doing the same. Then the real estate tycoons. It was a contagion, a digital plague spreading outward from the purple singularity of the teller's screen. "What is happening?" Mark stammered, swiping frantically at his screen. "Why are all my accounts flagging? Sterling, get up off the floor and fix this." Mr. Sterling did not get up. He remained on his knees, his head bowed toward me, behaving like a man praying for salvation in the face of the apocalypse. He ignored Mark entirely, his loyalty instantaneously overwritten by a biological imperative to survive the presence of a predator far higher up the food chain. "Sir," Henderson whispered, his voice cracking. The lawyer was staring at his own phone, his face the color of old ash. I just got an alert from the Bar Association and my firm's managing partner. They're asking if I represent Mark Vance." "Tell them yes," Mark snapped, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an enemy he could punch. "Tell them to sue this bank for everything they have." "I can't," Henderson said, stepping back. The physical distance he put between himself and Mark was small, but the symbolic distance was an ocean. They said if I am currently representing you, my license is effectively suspended pending a federal audit. Mark, they're talking about RICO statutes. They're talking about immediate asset forfeiture." "That's impossible," Mark scoffed, though the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "I haven't done anything illegal. This is a glitch. It's her." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She put some kind of malware in the terminal." I stood still, my hand resting lightly on the handle of my suitcase. I didn't need to speak. The card on the counter was doing all the talking for me. The purple screen pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, casting a bruised light over Tiffany's terrified face. "Mr. Vance," a new voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't Mr. Sterling. It was the head of security, the burly man who, moments ago, had been ready to drag me out onto the street. He had his earpiece pressed deep into his ear canal, listening to a voice that I imagined was coming from very, very far away. He looked pale. He looked at Mark not as a VIP client, but as a contagion. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter," the guard said. His hand was no longer resting casually on his belt. It was hovering over his baton. "You work for me," Mark shouted, his composure finally fracturing completely. "I keep my corporate accounts here. I know the CEO." "The CEO," Mr. Sterling said, finally raising his head but remaining on his knees, "has just resigned, Mr. Vance. The news hit the wire 30 seconds ago, effective immediately." Mark froze. "What?" "The board has been dissolved," Sterling continued, his voice hollow, reciting information he was likely receiving through an earpiece of his own. "Trading on First National stock has been halted on the NYSE due to unforeseen structural volatility. The bank is currently under the direct stewardship of the trust." Sterling slowly turned his head to look at Mark. There was no pity in his eyes, only the cold, hard calculation of a bureaucrat aligning himself with the new regime. "You don't know the CEO, Mr. Vance, because there isn't one. There is only the family, and you have just insulted a daughter of the line." Mark looked at me. For the first time, he really looked at me. He looked past the linen coat, past the lack of makeup, past the quiet demeanor he had mistaken for submission. He saw the stillness. He saw the way the room seemed to bend around me. "Elena," he whispered, "what did you do?" "I withdrew my support," I said softly. The notifications on his phone escalated. "Ping, your mortgage for the estate at Harrow Hill has been called. Full repayment due immediately due to breach of liquidity clauses." "Ping, the lease on your Porsche has been terminated. Recovery team dispatched." Ping. Amex Centurion account closed. Reason high-risk entity. Mark stared at the screen, scrolling through the destruction of his life in real time. It wasn't just money. It was his identity. Mark Vance was a construct made of credit scores, leverage, and reputation. And I was watching him be deleted, line by line of code. "Sarah," Mark gasped. He fumbled to dial. He needed a lifeline. He needed the steel heiress. He put the phone to his ear. We could all hear the ringtone in the silence of the lobby. Once. Twice. "Mark," Sarah's voice came through the speaker, sharp and panicked. "Don't call me. Don't ever call me again." "Sarah, listen, there's a mistake." "My father just got a call from the governor," Sarah shrieked. "They're threatening to pull the permits for the new steel mill, Mark, they said. They said it's because of my association with a financially toxic individual. My father is furious. The engagement is off. The merger is off. Lose this number." Click. The dial tone hummed like a flatline. Mark lowered the phone slowly. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He looked at Henderson. "I have to go," the lawyer said quickly, clutching his briefcase to his chest. I have a deposition. I'm resigning as your counsel, Mark. You'll get the paperwork." Henderson turned and walked away. He didn't run, but he walked with the frantic energy of a rat sensing the ship going down. He didn't look back. Mark was alone. He stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the marble pillars he loved so much. But now, the bank felt less like a cathedral and more like a tomb. "Mr. Sterling," I said. The manager flinched as if I had cracked a whip. "Yes, my lady." "I find the air in this lobby stifling," I said, "and the noise pollution is giving me a headache." Sterling scrambled to his feet, dusting off his suit knees with frantic motions. "At once, please allow us to escort you to the Obsidian Suite. It has been prepared. We didn't know the suite existed until the vault opened, but it is ready." He gestured to the heavy steel doors behind the teller line. "And him," Sterling pointed a trembling finger at Mark. I looked at my husband. He was staring at his dead phone, his mouth slightly open, his eyes glassy. He looked small. "He can wait," I said. "He has nowhere else to go. His driver has likely been notified that the corporate card paying for the ride is declined." I took the handle of my suitcase. "Allow me, madame." Sterling lunged forward, wrestling the battered handle from my grip. He treated the scuffed, dusty luggage as if it were the crown jewels, carrying it with both hands, straining under the weight but refusing to let it touch the ground again. I walked toward the vault. As I passed the security guard, he snapped to attention, executing a crisp salute that looked military in precision. I didn't look back at Mark. I didn't need to. I could feel his gaze burning into my back, a mixture of confusion, terror, and the dawning, horrific realization that he had been sleeping next to a dragon and complaining that she didn't breathe enough fire. The heavy steel doors of the secure wing hissed open. I stepped into the darkness beyond, leaving the wreckage of Mark Vance's life in the brightly lit lobby. The Obsidian Suite was not an office. It was a silence. Located deep within the bedrock beneath the bank, past 3 checkpoints and a retinal scanner that had updated itself the moment my card was keyed in upstairs, the room was a sanctuary of dark stone and black velvet. There were no windows. The air was purified to a level that made it tasteless. In the center of the room sat a desk made of a single slab of petrified wood, black as night, and behind it, a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne. I sat in the chair. It adjusted instantly to my posture. Mr. Sterling stood on the other side of the desk. He was sweating profusely, despite the cool air. He had placed a glass of water on the desk, crystal, cut in the same geometric pattern as my mother's card, and was now wringing his hands. The assets have been liquidized, madame," Sterling said, his voice barely a whisper in the acoustic deadness of the room. $5 million in cash, as per the emergency withdrawal protocols of the trust. We have packed it in the diplomatic briefcases." He gestured to two sleek, aluminum cases, resting on a side table. "And the rest?" I asked, taking a sip of the water. It was cold and clean. "The global limit has been unlocked," Sterling said. "Your signature is now valid currency in 140 countries. We have issued the black card, the true black card, not the centurion plastic we give to celebrities. It is linked directly to the sovereign reserves." He paused, swallowing hard. "We have also taken the liberty of purchasing the airline, Madame." I paused, the glass halfway to my lips. "The airline." "The one Mr. Vance booked your economy ticket on," Sterling explained rapidly. "The system detected an insult to the line. The trust's algorithm automatically executed a hostile takeover of the carrier's holding company. The flight has been canceled. The plane is currently being reconfigured for your private use. It will be ready in 2 hours." I set the glass down. My mother had warned me the card was powerful. She hadn't told me it was vindictive. It seemed the system she spoke of was an AI or a network of stewards, programmed to respond to disrespect with scorched earth financial warfare. "That was efficient," I said. "It is the way," Sterling bowed. A light blinked on the desk console. A soft tone chimed. "Security at the perimeter," Sterling said, checking a monitor embedded in the wood. "It is. The petitioner, Mr. Vance. He is demanding an audience, he says." Sterling hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "He says he is your husband and he commands you to speak to him." I traced the rim of the crystal glass with my finger. "Let him in." "Madame, he is distressed. He may be volatile. Security can remove him." "Let him in," I repeated. "Alone." Sterling bowed and pressed a button. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the suite groaned and slid open. Mark stumbled in. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the 20 minutes since I left the lobby. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. He was panting, his chest heaving as if he had run down the stairs. He stopped when he saw the room. The opulence of the black stone, the silence, the way Sterling, a man Mark had feared and respected, was standing like a butler at my side. Mark looked at me. I sat in the high-backed chair, the lighting designed to cast the sitter in shadow while illuminating the petitioner. "Elena," he croaked. "Hello, Mark," I said. He took a step forward, then stopped, unsure of the rules of this new world. "What is this?" He gestured around the room. "Who are you? I checked the databases, your name, Elena Lan. It comes up as nothing, a ghost. But then you tried to check the level 0 clearance." I finished for him. "The screen said, redacted by order of the council," Mark whispered. "Elena, you told me your father was a teacher. You told me you grew up in a small apartment." "He was a teacher," I said calmly. "And we did live in a small apartment. My mother chose that life. She walked away from this." I tapped the desk. "She wanted peace. She wanted to know what it was like to be loved for herself, not for the empire that stands behind her blood." Mark stared at me, his mind racing, trying to rewrite the history of our marriage. "So you were rich the whole time?" he asked. The question hung in the air, ugly and crude. "Rich is a vulgar word, Mark," I said. "Rich is what you wanted to be. Rich is having money. This." I gestured to the silent room. "This is sovereignty. This is old power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout." Mark's face twisted. A mix of greed, regret, and anger washed over him. "You lied to me," he accused, pointing a shaking finger. "You watched me struggle. You watched me stress over the merger, over the campaign funds. You could have fixed it all with a signature. You let me work myself to death while you sat on a gold mine." "I watched you live," I corrected him, my voice hardening. "I watched you build something, and I wanted to build it with you. I wanted to be your partner, Mark. not your financier, not your ATM. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. Mark took a step back instinctively. I had the card in my pocket every day, I said, walking around the desk. When you yelled at me for buying the expensive organic milk, when you told me I couldn't afford a new coat, when you made me ask for an allowance like a child, I had the power to buy the supermarket chain, the clothing line, and this bank. I stopped right in front of him. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne that was starting to sour. I didn't use it, I whispered, because I was waiting for you to see me. Just Alina. I thought that if I loved you enough, if I served you enough, you would eventually look at me and see a wife, not an acquisition. I did love you, Mark lied. The desperation in his voice was pathetic. Alina, baby, I was just stressed. The divorce. It was just politics. I had to do it for the campaign. You know I didn't want to. We can fix this. We can annul the papers. Think about what we could do together. With my connections and your resources, we could be kings. He reached for my hand. His palms were clammy. I looked at his hand, the hand that had signed the eviction notice, the hand that had pointed to the door. I pulled my hand away. You don't want a queen, Mark, I said coldly. You want a venture capitalist, and I'm afraid your pitch has been rejected. I turned back to the desk and picked up the 2 aluminum briefcases Sterling had prepared. They were heavy, filled with the only thing Mark understood, currency. Sterling, I said. Yes, madame. Mr. Vance is leaving. Ensure he has a ride. Of course. Wait, Mark shouted, panic rising again as he realized the negotiation was over. Alina, you can't leave me like this. You destroyed my credit. You destroyed my business deals. I have nothing. You can't just walk away. I looked at him one last time. I am not walking away with anything of yours, Mark, I said. I am leaving with exactly what I brought, my suitcases, my mother's box, and my dignity. I paused, a thought occurring to me. Actually, I added, reaching into one of the briefcases. I pulled out a single bundle of cash, $10,000 in crisp, fresh bills. I tossed it onto the black petrified wood desk. It landed with a soft thud. For the taxi, I said, and for the roast beef I didn't get to eat. Alina, he screamed, lunging toward me. 2 security guards materialized from the shadows near the blast doors. They didn't look like bank guards. They wore suits that cost more than Mark's car, and they moved with the lethal fluidity of special forces. They intercepted Mark effortlessly, one hand on his chest, and he was pinned against the wall, gasping for air. Do not touch the principal, one of the guards said. His voice was devoid of emotion. I walked to the door. The aluminum briefcases were heavy in my hands, but my heart felt lighter than it had in 3 years. Goodbye, Mark, I said without looking back. Good luck with the Senate run. I hear the demographic is very particular about candidates who can't pay their rent. The blast doors slid shut behind me, sealing the tomb. I walked down the long, lit corridor toward the private elevator that would take me to the roof, where the helicopter was waiting. Mr. Sterling trotted beside me, struggling to keep up with my stride. Where to, madame? He asked breathlessly. The plane is being fueled. The pilot awaits your coordinates. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the world of First National Bank, the world of Mark Vance, the world of smallness. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. The woman looking back wasn't the scared immigrant wife anymore. She was the storm that had finally broken. Take me home, Sterling, I said. Home to the estate, he asked. No, I smiled, and for the first time it reached my eyes. Take me to the airport. I have a country to visit. It's been a long time since the House of Lan held court. The elevator surged upward, rising toward the sky that had fallen just as my mother said it would. But she was right. When the sky falls, you can see the stars so much clearer. The elevator doors slid open, revealing not a hallway but the gray, churning sky of New York City. The wind on the rooftop was fierce, whipping my hair across my face, but for the first time in years, the cold didn't make me shiver. It felt like a baptism. A sleek, black helicopter sat on the helipad, its rotors slowly beginning to turn, slicing through the air with a rhythmic thump-thump-thump that sounded like a heartbeat returning to life. The tail number didn't carry a corporate logo, just a small, golden crest, the same geometric fractal that was etched onto the metal card in my pocket. Mr. Sterling held his hand out to guide me, his posture deferential against the gale. "Your transport to Teterboro Airport, Madame," he shouted over the rising whine of the turbine. "The Gulf Stream is fueled and cleared for immediate departure to Singapore. Your mother's estate has been notified of your return." I paused at the edge of the roof. I walked to the parapet and looked down. From this height, the cars were just crawling beetles, yellow and black dots navigating the grid. The people were invisible specks. Somewhere down there, 50 stories below, was the sidewalk where I had stood an hour ago, terrified and penniless. Somewhere down there was the man who had looked at me and seen nothing but clutter to be removed. "Sterling," I said, my voice calm despite the noise. "Madame," he leaned in close to hear. "Ensure the divorce papers are finalized by morning. Give him whatever he wants from the house. The furniture, the paintings, the cars. Let him keep the shell of the life he loved so much." Sterling looked confused. "But Madame, we can crush him. We can foreclose on the property by sunset. We can leave him with nothing." I looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip behind the skyscrapers, painting the city in bruised purples and oranges. "No," I said. "If we take everything, he will blame us. He will tell himself he is a victim of a powerful conspiracy. He will be a martyr." I turned to Sterling, my eyes hard. "Let him keep the house. Let him live in those empty rooms. Let him stare at the closet where my clothes used to be. I want him to have everything he thought he wanted, so he can realize exactly how empty it is without me. That is the only punishment that lasts." Sterling blinked, then bowed low. "Understood the cruelty of mercy. It is very traditional." I climbed into the helicopter. The interior was upholstered in cream leather, smelling of fresh citrus and quiet wealth. I buckled the strap. As the machine lifted off, the ground fell away. The bank, the street, the city, it all shrank until it was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. 50 floors below, the revolving doors of the First National Bank spit Mark Vance out onto the sidewalk. He stumbled, losing his footing on the slick pavement. He wasn't thrown out physically. The security guards hadn't touched him once they reached the lobby, but he had been ejected spiritually. The air inside the bank had simply become too thin for him to breathe. He stood on Fifth Avenue, clutching the bundle of $10,000 Alina had tossed onto the desk. The rubber band around the cash felt tight against his sweating palm. Passers-by bumped into him. A businessman in a hurry clipped his shoulder and muttered, "Watch it, buddy." Mark didn't move. He stared at the glass doors. Inside, he could see the lobby returning to normal. The purple screens were gone. The vault was closed. Tiffany was back at her window, counting bills for a tourist. It was as if the last hour hadn't happened, as if a goddess hadn't walked in, stopped time, and walked out. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his real estate agent. "Market update. The listing for the Harrow Hill estate has been flagged. Buyer interest dropping due to zoning complications." Then a text from his campaign manager. "Mark, I saw the news about the Steel merger collapsing. We need to talk. The donors are getting nervous. You're polling at single digits." Mark looked at the phone, then at the stack of cash in his hand. $10,000. It was a lot of money to most people. To him, an hour ago, it was lunch money. Now it was his net worth. A sound from above made him look up. Far overhead, a black shape detached itself from the roof of the bank tower. A helicopter. It banked sharply, turning east, catching the last rays of the setting sun. The light glinted off the fuselage, blindingly bright. Mark shaded his eyes. He knew she was in there. He remembered the way she used to look at him when he came home late, with concern, with warmth, offering to heat up his dinner. He remembered how she sat quietly at his parties, letting him shine, never correcting him when he mispronounced her favorite authors, never showing off her education because she knew his fragile ego couldn't take it. She had made herself small so he could feel big. And he had thrown her away because he wanted someone substantial. She owns the bank, he whispered to the uncaring street. She owns the goddamn bank. A taxi slowed down in front of him. The driver rolled down the window. You need a ride, pal. You look like you seen a ghost. Mark looked at the taxi. He looked at the cash. Yeah, Mark croaked. Take me to the airport. JFK. No, Mark said, his shoulders slumping. Just drive. I don't think I can catch that flight anymore. 5 hours later, 40,000 feet over the Atlantic. The cabin of the Gulfstream G650 was silent. The ambient lighting was set to a warm amber. I sat in a plush swivel chair, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that the stewardess had brought me. On the table in front of me sat a cup of jasmine tea, steaming gently, and next to it the box. I opened it. I took out the metal card. I hadn't put it back in the box yet. I held it, feeling the weight. For 10 years, I had treated this card like a shameful secret, a radioactive artifact from a life I wanted to escape. I had wanted to be normal. I had wanted to be an American wife, worrying about mortgages and grocery bills. I realized now that I had been hiding from my own strength. I thought love meant diminishing myself to fit into someone else's world. The stewardess, a young woman named May with sharp, intelligent eyes, approached softly. Madame Lan, she asked, we will be landing in Singapore for refueling in 4 hours. The family has prepared the villa. Your uncle, the patriarch. He sent a message. I looked up. What did he say? He said, the long vacation is over. Welcome back to the board. I smiled. It wasn't the polite, submissive smile of Alina Vance. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes, a smile that knew the cost of power. Tell him I'm ready, I said. I picked up the metal card and slipped it into the breast pocket of my blouse, right over my heart. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like an anchor. I picked up my tea and looked out the window at the endless field of stars. Mark was down there somewhere in the dark in the house I had kept clean for him. He would wake up tomorrow in a king-sized bed that felt too big. He would have his freedom. He would have his bachelorhood. He would have his silence. But my silence was different now. Mine wasn't the silence of the oppressed. Mine was the silence of the stratosphere, high, cold, and untouchable. I took a sip of tea. It tasted like home.